Chapter 1. The Execution Chamber and Family Court. They possessed zero concept that my simple signature on Appendix B was not an act of submission, but the trigger mechanism of a financial time bomb that would systematically annihilate their fake generational wealth within 72 hours. The oak doors of courtroom 4B swung shut with a resounding thud, sealing me inside what Arthur Kensington and the Montgomery family intended to be my professional slaughterhouse. Directly to Julian's left sat Arthur Kensington, the senior litigation partner at Kensington and Sterling LLP, and the husband of Julian's older sister, Beatrix Montgomery Kensington. Sign on the dotted line, Sarah and Seraphina, Arthur Kensington instructed, his baritone voice dripping with patronizing superiority as he glanced toward the public gallery behind him. Play nice, accept reality, and walk awayly. Be a cooperative, sensible woman. Sign over the quantitative trading firm to Julian without further dispute. And maybe Julian will permit you to retain your personal sedan and your downtown condo. I lowered my eyes to the first page of the settlement binder, scanning the unambiguous language of Section 4, Asset Transfer and Ownership Reassignment. The document explicitly mandated the total, unencumbered transfer of 100% of the voting shares, proprietary trading algorithms, client accounts, and intellectual property of Aegis Quantitative Trading to Julian Montgomery, alongside the deed to our sprawling 6-acre Buckhead residential estate. Before I could reach across the table for the document, a fingernail-deep pinch against my right bicep pulled my attention away from the legal text. Just sign the paper right now, Seraphina, my mother hissed through gritted teeth, her fingers tightening their bruising grip on my arm. Do not dare make a public scene for the church elders and the country club ladies to gossip about over Sunday brunch. Men make mistakes, and you should have simply stayed on your knees praying for his guidance, instead of forcing this divorce and embarrassing our name before Lady Eleanor. I turned my head, locking my gaze onto the face of the woman who had birthed me. You are explicitly asking me to surrender 8 years of mathematical engineering and $12 million in equity, just to protect Eleanor Montgomery's social standing at church. Mother? I asked. You want me to reward the man who brought his pregnant 24-year-old mistress into our home and stole my grandmother's diamonds. Pride goes before destruction, Seraphina Vance, she whispered with venomous urgency. Give them the firm right now so we can hold our heads high in the sanctuary on Sunday morning. Do not be a bitter, difficult woman. I looked away from my mother, turning my attention back to Arthur Kensington, across the table. With practiced theatricality, Arthur flipped the binder to the final signature page of Appendix B. I did not shed a tear, nor did I utter a syllable of protest or attempt to debate the moral depravity of their demands. I picked up the gold pen from the table, edged the cuff of my emerald silk blazer, and signed my legal name across the dotted line of Appendix B with bold, fluid, deliberate strokes. The instant the binder crossed the center dividing line of the table, Lady Eleanor Montgomery leaped to her feet in the front row of the public gallery. Praise the Lord for restoring the Montgomery family assets to their rightful heir, Eleanor declared loudly. Arthur Kensington snatched the binder off the table, hastily scanning my signature across the bottom of the page before flashing a triumphant grin at Julian. I stood up from my upholstered chair, adjusting the lapels of my tailored emerald suit and picking up my leather briefcase. I looked across the table, locking my gaze into Julian Montgomery's eyes for the first time that morning. Congratulations on your acquisition, Julian, I said, my voice carrying with razor-sharp clarity across the sudden of the courtroom. You just acquiredly what you deserve. I turned my back on my birth mother, without offering her a second glance, ignored Arthur Kensington's mocking salute with his fountain pen, and walked down the center aisle of courtroom 4B, with my head held high and my heels clicking steadily against the hardwood. They executed the master settlement, Marcus, I said. Arthur Kensington was so intoxicated by his own arrogance that he never reviewed the debt assumption covenants inside Appendix B. Chapter 2. The Crimson Suit at the Garden Tribunal. 72 hours after the courthouse execution, the thick Sunday afternoon heat across the northern hills of Buckhead was suffocating, yet the sprawling 3-acre grounds of Sprouston Manor remained a shaded sanctuary of old Southern opulence. I parked my personal vehicle half a block away along the shaded Oak Avenue. Stepping out onto the asphalt without a trace of Sunday country club casual in my attire, almost instantly, the social atmosphere across the lawn began to freeze. I ignored their gaping stares, walking with measured grace down the center of the terrace until I reached the sprawling 30-foot banquet table of imported white lilies and silver serving platters. I set my polished silver tray in the dead center of the linen tablecloth. Before I could retract my hands from the silver handles, Lady Eleanor Montgomery marched across the stone terrace like a military commander, preparing to repel an invasion. "What in the name of heaven do you think you are doing on my private property, Serafina?" Eleanor demanded, her voice vibrating with practiced aristocratic outrage that carried across the lawn. "Have you lost your senses and your decency? You signed the divorce settlement on Thursday morning. You surrendered the quantitative trading firm, you gave up your rights to the Buckhead estate, and Julian won absolute custody of our family assets. So whyly are you crashing my family's victory celebration bearing a silver tray? Are you standing here in that loud, ridiculous suit trying to beg Julian for emergency alimony or financial mercy before our guests?" "I simply brought my signature side dish to the Sunday table, Eleanor," I replied, my voice carrying with crystal clarity across the dead-silent terrace without raising my pitch by a decibel. "I know how much Julian has always depended on my contributions to keep his table full. You have no rank and no place at this table any longer, Serafina," she declared loudly. "Julian has elevated his life to a woman of breeding who understands the duties of a corporate wife. You entered our dynasty from a rundown neighborhood with zero assets, and now you are exiting back into obscurity with nothing." For 5 years, I hadly absorbed Eleanor Montgomery's subtle, patronizing insults regarding my working-class background and my mathematical career. Julian finally stepped out from beneath the shaded veranda, puffing out his chest in his tailored linen suit, as he attempted to project the authority of a seasoned corporate patriarch before his peers. "You need to turn around and walk out the gates right now, Serafina," Julian commanded, attempting to tone his voice for the benefit of the watching bankers. "Chloe and I are celebrating our new beginning and the expansion of my quantitative trading firm. Accept your legal defeat like an adult and leave my property before I have Arthur call security to escort you off the grass." Before I could answer Julian's blustering demand, Arthur Kensington pushed his way to the front of the gathering, holding a glass of imported scotch in his right hand. "Let us not make a scene for the local authorities, Serafina," Arthur Kensington chuckled, his harsh, grating tone grating against the afternoon silence. "You played a tenacious game during discovery, but the chess match is over, and you checkmated yourself. You signed Appendix B. Return to whatever rented apartment you found downtown and allow the actual corporate owners to enjoy their Sunday celebration." I looked from Arthur's arrogant grin to Julian's puffed-out chest, and finally to Lady Eleanor's trembling lavender hat. Chapter 3. The $500 K promissory note and the Iolta Trust bombshell. I reached into the tailored side pocket of my crimson blazer and retrieved a sleek, polished silver USB flash drive, holding it between my thumb and forefinger so that the bright Georgia sun reflected off the metal housing toward Arthur Kensington's face. I did not surrender a $12 million quantitative trading kingdom on Thursday morning. "Arthur," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, commanding precision across the silent lawn. I simply handed Julian Montgomery a ticking financial time bomb. "You must forgive my ex-wife, ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced. "The emotional strain of the divorce and losing her position at the firm has triggered a psychological breakdown. Please leave right now, Serafina. You are making a spectacle of yourself before the pastor, and you are distressing Chloe." I did not shift my weight by an inch, nor did I lower the silver flash drive from my steady grip. "We do not need to rely on subjective emotion or memory, Julian," I statedly, taking a measured step closer to the buffet table, "because this silver drive contains the complete, unredacted banking ledgers, encrypted wire authorizations, and offshore server logs from the past 36 months. And unless your memory has failed you since Thursday morning, you remember what happened when you accumulated $500,000 in high-stakes syndicated sports betting and crypto derivative losses, with the Apex Syndicate, operating out of downtown Atlanta. Julian froze. How dare you utter such outrageous, slanderous lies against my son before our church leadership? Eleanor shrieked. Julian is a brilliant venture investor who has never engaged in illicit gambling. I will have Arthur file an immediate defamation lawsuit against you tomorrow morning. I ignored Eleanor's screeching defense, shifting my eyes across the lawn toward the stone fountain where my birth mother, Clarissa Vance, stood frozen in her pastel yellow suit, her knuckles white as she clutched her designer handbag against her chest. 2 years ago, Julian came stumbling into our Buckhead home at midnight in a blind, hyperventilating panic, I announced, my voice carryingly across the 3-acre garden while my eyes remained locked onto my mother's pale face. He informed the family that he had suffered a sudden catastrophic liquidity loss due to a fraudulent commercial real estate syndication in Tampa. But there was no commercial real estate syndication in Tampa, was there, Julian? You owed $500,000 in defaulted debt to an illegal offshore gambling syndicate men who do not issue civil collection notices, but dispatch enforcers to break your physical kneecaps when your wire transfers bounce. A collective audible gasp rippled across the shaded terrace. Julian desperately needed $500,000 in immediate, untraceable liquid cash within 48 hours, I continued, my cadence razor-sharp and relentless. He knew he could never extract $500,000 from my quantitative trading accounts because I audited our daily balance sheets down to the cent every evening at 7 o'clock. And Clarissa, bless her desperate heart, decided to play the heroic savior for the handsome blue-blood son-in-law she worshipped. My mother lowered her head toward the grass, her shoulders shaking as she actively refused to meet my direct gaze before the watching crowd. Of course, liquidating $500,000 in cash from a state teacher, a minter fund pension, and secondary annuity accounts triggers mandatory federal tax penalties, early withdrawal flags, and IRS reporting thresholds, I explained, locking eyes with Arthur. You cannot simply extract $500,000 from a state pension without triggering an immediate audit from my accounting firm. Arthur Kensington utilized his high-level credentials at Kensington and Sterling LLP to draft a fraudulent commercial promissory note, legally classifying my mother's life savings as a venture capital seed investment for a non-existent Delaware technology startup named Vance Montgomery Innovations. Arthur executed the filings through his corporate firm, successfully laundering the pension extraction, covering Julian's gambling debts, and hiding the felony from the Internal Revenue Service and from my audit. I turned my gaze back toward Clarissa Vance standing near the fountain, fully expecting to witness a wave of maternal realization or righteous indignation wash over her instead. My mother straightened her pastel yellow church jacket, marched 12 steps across the stone terrace until she stood before me, and glared into my face with unadulterated, blinding fury. Why in God's name are you dragging up ancient history and airing private family matters before Pastor Miller and the church elders? Seraphina, Clarissa screamed, her voice trembling with rage directed at me rather than the men who had robbed her. Julian already apologized to me in private 2 years ago. He was simply a young executive who made a minor financial miscalculation and needed temporary assistance. You are actively destroying this family's holy standing in the church and embarrassing Lady Eleanor on her own terrace. The Bible commands us to extend 70 times 7 forgiveness to our family, yet you stand here full of toxic bitterness, jealousy, and spite, attempting to ruin a beautiful Sunday celebration. You should be down on your knees begging God for forgiveness for your wicked tongue. I stared at the woman standing before me. I let out a slow, steady breath, feeling the final, lingering thread of maternal attachment snap cleanly inside my chest. Beatrix, I said, my cadence and resonant across the lawn. Instead of wondering why your husband risked federal disbarment to assist Julian 2 years ago, you might want to ask Arthur why he was so extraordinarily desperate to handle our divorce litigation for free over the past 6 months, just to ensure I signed away my firm and exited this family as rapidly as possible. Before Beatrix could open her lips to question her husband, Arthur Kensington lunged across the flagstones with terrifying, violent speed. "Shut your mouth right now, and get your body off this property before I break your jaw." "Serafina!" Arthur growled, his voice dropping into a vicious, guttural register intended for my ears alone as his fingers dug into my silk blazer. "You are finished here. Do not force me to physically drag you down this driveway and throw you into the street like the common trash you are." I looked down at his large white hand wrapped tightly around my arm, then raised my head until my eyes locked into his pale, panicked pupils. "Remove your hand from my physical persons within 3 seconds, Arthur," I statedly. "Or I will add aggravated felony assault and battery to the comprehensive ethics and disbarment dossier that the Georgia State Bar Association and the United States Attorney's Office will begin auditing at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Arthur hesitated, his eyes darting toward Pastor Miller and the bank presidents who were now observing his physical assault with undisguised shock. "What is inside that folder?" "Serafina?" Julian demanded, his voice pitching upward as he grabbed Chloe Winslow's wrist and pulled her forward. "More of your fabricated, paranoid accounting spreadsheets?" "No, Julian," I replied, laying the sleeve where Arthur had grabbed me. "Just the complete, certified monthly wire statements from Arthur Kensington's primary IOLTA client trust account, the mandatory statutory escrow account, where Kensington and Sterling holds fiduciary client funds and corporate retainers." Yet, over the past 9 months, Arthur has authorized monthly wire transfers of $6,500 from that escrow account to a commercial property management firm in Buckhead. "Arthur, what is she talking about right now?" Beatrix asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Why are you wiring $6,500 a month out of your firm's IOLTA trust account to a commercial property manager?" "Well, Beatrix," I answered, my tone dripping with icy precision. "When I initiated a comprehensive forensic audit of Julian's hidden personal assets during discovery, 3 months ago, I uncovered a 12-month residential lease executed for a luxury 3-bedroom penthouse at the Sovereign Towers in Buckhead. The master lease is registered under Julian Montgomery's legal name." Lady Eleanor clapped her hands together, letting out a loud, breathless laugh of triumphant vindication. "You see right there," Eleanor declared to the church elders. "I told every one of you that my son is a successful venture investor. He holds prime residential real estate in Buckhead." "It is not an investment property or a rental asset, Eleanor," I corrected her, turning my eyes toward Chloe Winslow, who had begun to tremble violently against Julian's side. "It is Chloe Winslow's luxury residential penthouse." "So what if the lease is in my name, Serafina?" Julian boasted loudly. "I am the chief executive of a major trading firm now. I take care of my woman, I provide luxury housing for my partner, and I am preparing a home for our future baby. You are just consumed by bitter jealousy because I upgraded my life to a younger, more attractive woman while you are left alone with your computer screens." I let out a ringing laugh of unadulterated amusement that echoed across the stone terrace of Sprouston Manor. "You do not pay the $6,500 monthly rent on that Buckhead penthouse, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his boast like a scalpel. "You do not possess the liquid capital required to cover the basic building maintenance fees. The residential lease is registered under your name as a convenient corporate shield, but the monthly rent payments of $6,500 are wired from Arthur Kensington's IOLTA client trust account every first of the month." The 3-acre garden terrace plunged into a dead, ringing silence. "Arthur," Beatrix breathed, her voice dropping into a ragged, terrified whisper, "why are you using your law firm's escrow trust account to wire $6,500 every month to pay the rent on my brother's 24-year-old mistress's luxury penthouse?" "Beatrix, sweetheart, please listen to me right now," Arthur stammered frantically, his voice cracking with desperation. "It is simply a temporary private bridge loan. Julian needed immediate, confidential residential housing for the young lady during the divorce transition, and her personal credit score was unviable. I was merely providing short-term family liquidity to assist your brother. It is documented as an internal family loan, I swear to you." I reached forward across the linen tablecloth, unclipped the red evidentiary seal on the second expansion folder, and extracted a 12-page medical dossier bearing thief-embossed blue crest of the Geneva Fertility and Reproductive Medicine Institute. "You are an extraordinarily sloppy liar, Arthur," I said, holding up a certified laboratory diagnostic report for the terrace to observe. "You see, Julian, when you walked into our Buckhead kitchen 4 months ago and proudly announced that you were divorcing me because Chloe Winslow was 6 months pregnant, with the Montgomery heir that I had failed to give you, I was initially devastated. Heiress Thorne at the Geneva Institute diagnosed after your final biopsy, Julian." Julian's mouth fell open, his eyes widening in absolute horror as his gaze locked onto the blue medical crest in my hand. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing rapidly against his collar as his knees began to tremble. "The clinical diagnostic records from the Geneva Institute confirm with 100% biological certainty that Julian Montgomery suffers from complete, irreversible azoospermia and structural infertility," I announced. "Dr. Thorne explicitly informed Julian in writing 3 years ago that he possesses a absolute 0% biological probability of ever fathering a child without complex surgical extraction and specialized clinical in vitro fertilization." Chloe Winslow let out a terrified gasp, yanking her hand out of Julian's grasp as though his skin had caught fire. She stumbled 3 steps backward across the flagstones, colliding with the edge of the buffet table and nearly knocking over the silver trays. "So I was forced to ask myself a very basic mathematical question, Julian," I continued, my voice rising with absolute crushing authority over the terrace. "If certified medical science confirms that you cannot biologically father a child under normal physical circumstances, how is your 24-year-old mistress currently 6 months pregnant?" I slammed the 12-page Geneva medical diagnostic report onto the center of the buffet table, right on top of Arthur Kensington's IOLTA wire statements. I deployed 2 senior private investigators from my forensic security division to conduct 24-hour surveillance on that Buckhead penthouse over the past 90 days. I announced, turning my freezing gaze onto Chloe Winslow, whose face had gone ashen. And my investigators documented that Chloe Winslow was not merely utilizing Julian Montgomery as a convenient financial cover. She has been maintaining an active 18-month physical affair with the same senior litigation partner who was secretly wiring $6,500 of stolen client trust money every month to pay her penthouse rent. The same senior corporate partner who was so terrified that his wife Beatrix would discover his pregnant 24-year-old mistress that he volunteered to handle Julian's divorce litigation for free, drafted an aggressive 60-page settlement binder, and forced the agreement through Superior Court at lightning speed, just to ensure that Julian took ownership of the firm and provided a permanent legal father for Arthur Kensington's unborn child. Beatrix Montgomery Kensington let out a harrowing sound that fractured the garden's silence, a visceral, agonizing cry that hovered between a sob and a scream. She stared at Chloe Winslow's 6-month pregnant abdomen, then turned her head toward her husband of 10 years. "Tell me this is a fabricated lie right now, Arthur." Beatrix screamed, grabbing the collar of his pastel blue polo shirt with both hands and shaking his frame violently. "Look me in the eyes before my family and swear to me that you did not impregnate my brother's 24-year-old receptionist and steal trust funds to house her in Buckhead." Arthur could not raise his eyes to meet his wife's gaze. In a flash of unadulterated, explosive Southern rage, Beatrix pulled her right arm back and struck Arthur Kensington squarely across the left cheek with an open palm. Julian stood frozen in the center of the terrace, his arms hanging limply at his sides. "You think you are such a mathematical genius, Serafina." Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, his face contorted into an ugly mask of unhinged rage as he marched toward me across the stones. "You think walking onto my mother's terrace with private investigators and medical charts changes anything about what happened in courtroom 4B. I do not care about what Chloe did. I do not care about Arthur's affairs. You are simply a bitter, barren, isolated woman who lost her life. I still won the war." The Superior Court judge stamped the master decree. "I own 100% of Aegis Quantitative Trading. I own the Buckhead estate. I own every proprietary algorithm and every client account. You are walking off this terrace with zero assets, while I am taking command of a $12 million corporate enterprise at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I will see you at the trading floor tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Mr. Chief Executive Officer, I said, my voice level. Be sure to bring a cardboard box, Chapter 4. The federal task force at Aegis Quantitative Monday morning broke over the northern skyline of Atlanta, accompanied by a violent, torrential summer thunderstorm. By 8 o'clock, the federal task force had officially secured the executive suite at 9 o'clock. The private brass elevator doors chimed at the end of the executive reception atrium and slid open. Arthur Kensington was sporting a dark, swollen, 4-inch purple contusion across his left cheekbone, the physical testimony of Beatrix's open palm strike at the Garden Gala 24 hours earlier. You have 5 minutes to your personal items from this executive desk and vacate the premises. Serafina, Arthur Kensington barked, slamming his leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany right in front of my espresso cup. This quantitative trading firm legally belongs to Julian Montgomery now, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, your security credentials are revoked, and you are officially trespassing on private, corporate property. Did you employees not hear the senior legal counsel? Eleanor demanded in an authoritative tone. Julian is the sole chief executive officer and owner of this trading firm now. Stop typing on your computers in this room so my son can conduct his morning executive briefing. If you do not vacate this boardroom, we will instruct building security to physically throw all of you out into the thunderstorm alongside your former boss. Julian finally approached the head of the table, placing both of his palms flat against the polished mahogany and leaning his upper body forward in an attempt to physically tower over my seated frame. This quantitative trading firm is mine. Serafina, Julian declared, his voice shaking with forced, precarious bravado. You signed Section 4 and Appendix B in open court. You surrendered the trading floor, you surrendered the algorithmic models, you surrendered the Buckhead mansion, and you transferred the corporate revenue stream to my name. I am the master of this business now, and my first executive act is terminating your employment. Get out of my building right now. I took a slow, measured sip of my black espresso, set the porcelain cup down on its silver saucer with a crisp click, and looked up at Julian without rising from my chair or raising my voice. I would like to introduce you to the individuals sitting at this boardroom table, Julian. I said, gesturing with my right hand toward the 50-year-old man in the dark charcoal suit sitting to my left. This is Senior Examiner Vance Harrison from the Securities and Exchange Commission Division of Enforcement. They arrived at 6 o'clock this morning with federal warrants to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of the corporate accounts, holding structures, and liabilities that you explicitly claimed total legal ownership of on Thursday morning. Arthur Kensington froze instantly. Senior Examiner Harrison adjusted his steel-rimmed glasses, picked up his fountain pen, and looked across the mahogany table at Arthur Kensington with freezing, bureaucratic detachment. Are you Arthur Kensington, senior partner at Kensington and Sterling LLP, and the attorney of record who drafted, executed, and certified the asset transfer and debt assumption schedules for this corporate entity? Examiner Harrison asked, his voice stripped of emotion, carrying the mechanical weight of federal authority. Yes, I am the legal counsel of record, Examiner. Arthur stammered, raising his hands in a frantic, defensive gesture as he backed away from the table. But this is an internal, confidential civil domestic relations matter adjudicated by the Fulton County Superior Court. We possess a stamped judicial decree transferring ownership of this private trading firm. You have no federal enforcement jurisdiction inside this corporate boardroom over a civil divorce settlement. I reached into my leather briefcase resting beside my chair and retrieved the original 60-page master settlement binder, the same document Arthur Kensington had smugly slid across the table in courtroom 4B, and the same agreement my birth mother had forced me to sign under religious duress. You see, Arthur, you were so extraordinarily intoxicated by your 6-month campaign to break my spirit, And Julian was so blinded by his desperation to harvest my $12 million trading revenue to fund his new life that neither of you performed basic corporate due diligence before closing the settlement. Said, my voice steady, analytical, and uncompromising. You desired absolute ownership of this quantitative trading firm with such blinding greed that you drafted a blanket, unconditional transfer of 100% of the corporate assets, holding structures, and attached liabilities without ever once ordering an independent forensic audit of our subsidiary balance sheets. What does that mean right now, Arthur? Julian demanded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, terrified whine. What is she talking about? Why are the SEC and the FBI sitting in my boardroom auditing my firm? It means, Julian, that you did not just inherit a $12 million high-frequency quantitative trading firm and its proprietary revenue algorithms on Thursday morning. I explained, leaning forward and resting my forearms against the polished mahogany. You inherited the corporate holding shell that I systematically restructured and segregated 3 months ago after discovering your missing capital and your residential lease in Buckhead. A corporate holding entity that currently carries $28 million in leveraged, high-yield institutional debt that I strategically acquired from overseas syndicates using this corporate entity as primary collaterally 14 days before you filed your divorce petition. You cannot do that, Arthur screamed. That is deliberate corporate fraud and fraudulent conveyance. Serafina, you intentionally saddled the marital business entity with $28 million in toxic leveraged liabilities prior to the judicial transfer. That is illegal. I will have you disbarred. I will have you indicted by the grand jury, and I will have you thrown into a federal penitentiary for 20 years. I smiled across the table. It is never fraudulent conveyance or corporate fraud when the acquiring party's senior legal counsel explicitly drafts, demands, and signs off on the unconditional transfer and personal assumption of all outstanding liabilities. Arthur, I replied, it is simply superior algorithmic execution and flawless legal strategy. Chapter 5, The 28M Appendix B Trap and the Empty Shell. Julian Montgomery was breathing in ragged, hyperventilating heaves, gripping the hair on both sides of his head, with shaking hands as the room began to spin around him. I rested my right palm against the thick leather cover of the master settlement binder. As a senior litigation partner earning 7 figures at an elite corporate law firm, Arthur, you really should make it a professional practice to read the fine print of the agreements you force your opponents to sign, I said softly, leaning back into my high-backed executive chair with absolute composure. Let us turn to Appendix B, Section 12, Subclause 4, shall we? Arthur stared down at the thick binder, as though the leather cover were coated in lethal venom. His hands shook violently as he reached out, flipped past the primary asset transfer schedules, and opened the dense 50-page technical financial addendum that constituted Appendix B. I watched Arthur's bloodshot eyes track rapidly across the dense legal and financial terminology of Appendix B, Section 12. You see, Arthur depended on his unearned, blue-blood arrogance during this litigation, I explained to the boardroom. He expended 6 consecutive months bullying my corporate attorneys, burying our firm in frivolous discovery motions, and treating me like an isolated, technically illiterate housewife who was simply playing at quantitative finance. He bypassed, ignored, and failed to read the 50-page debt assumption and corporate restructuring schedule attached to Appendix B. What does Appendix B say right now, Arthur? Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice pitching upward into a hysterical, terrified screech as he grabbed Arthur's shoulder and shook him violently. Read the damn clause to me right now. Tell her she is lying. Tell her to get out of my executive office. Julian tugged desperately at the lapels of his $3,000 pinstripe suit, looking wildly around the glass boardroom as if waiting for his mother or a court bailiff to materialize and validate his executive dominion. Allow me to explain the statutory mechanics to you. Julian, since your senior litigation partner appears to have temporarily lost his capacity for human speech, I said, my voice carrying with absolute, crushing authority over the boardroom. For 7 consecutive years during our marriage, you and Lady Eleanor treated my quantitative trading firm like your personal, inexhaustible ATM machine. You operated under the profound, arrogant assumption that because I worked 80 hours a week writing algorithms without complaining, that I was mathematically and legally blind. You forgot that I am a quantitative algorithmic architect and a certified forensic data engineer. My professional existence is built upon tracking complex capital flows, structuring derivative layers, and auditing institutional liabilities across global markets down to the millisecond. Do not you dare speak to my son in that disrespectful tone, Serafina Vance. Eleanor snapped, though her voice lacked its usual commanding resonance. The Superior Court judge signed and stamped the Master Asset Decree. We own this quantitative trading corporation and every dollar of its accounts. You own a corporate holding entity registered under the name Aegis Quantitative Trading LLC. Eleanor, I corrected Hurley, turning my gaze to meet her frightened eyes. But you do not own my trading firm, my proprietary algorithms, or my institutional client assets. You see, 3 months ago, on the evening that I discovered Julian's $500,000 gambling debt with the Apex Syndicate and his residential lease for Chloe Winslow in Buckhead, I initiated a comprehensive, multi-layered corporate restructuring across my portfolio. Over a 90-day operational window, I legally, cleanly, and systematically transferred every proprietary high-frequency trading algorithm, every institutional client account, every sovereign wealth management contract, and every dollar of liquid capital out of this Georgia corporate entity and into a newly chartered, protected Delaware Master Holding Corporation named Aegis Sovereign Holding and Algorithmic Systems LLC, an entity owned 100% exclusively by me under a private Delaware trust. A Delaware Master Holding Corporation, an empty corporate shell, Julian repeated, his voice shaking uncontrollably. That is mathematically impossible. When Arthur subpoenaed the corporate bank statements last month during discovery, the balance sheets showed $12 million in active trading revenue and liquid reserves. Oh, the Georgia corporate entity that you acquired on Thursday morning definitely maintains active operating accounts and institutional credit lines. Julian, I replied, offering him a freezing, radiant smile across the table. But those subsidiary accounts do not hold trading revenue or liquid assets any longer. They hold institutional debt. I reached forward and tapped my index finger twice against the text of Appendix B, Section 12. Over the past 60 days, while Arthur was busy filing 200 frivolous discovery motions to exhaust my legal team, I utilized this Georgia corporate entity as the primary corporate anchor to acquire $28 million in high-yield, distressed, leveraged corporate debt from 3 international private equity syndicates operating out of the Cayman Islands and Zurich. I structured the debt instruments with strict, non-negotiable cross-collateralization covenants anchored to Aegis Quantitative Trading LLC. I paused, allowing the sheer mathematical weight of the number to settle over the boardroom before delivering the final structural execution. When you and Arthur drafted Section 4 of the Master Settlement and demanded absolute, total ownership of this Georgia corporate entity without independent audit, you demanded every financial instrument, contract, and liability legally attached to its registration, I stated cleanly. And according to Appendix B, Section 12, Subclause 4, the clause that Arthur certified with his signature, the acquiring sole owner of this corporate entity explicitly waives all limited liability corporate protections and voluntarily assumes full, complete, and personal responsibility for all attached corporate liability existing at the moment of judicial transfer. By signing that settlement decree in Courtroom 4B on Thursday morning and forcing me to execute the transfer under duress, you legally, personally, and irreversibly absorbed $28 million in toxics, defaulted institutional debt onto your own name, Julian. And those $28 million in leveraged notes contain an immediate 90-day acceleration maturity clause upon any change in corporate ownership. Arthur Kensington dropped the 60-page settlement binder onto the mahogany table with a sickening thud that echoed off the glass walls. She is right, Julian. Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible, over the sound of the thunderstorm beating against the 20-story tower. The language inside Appendix B, Section 12 is airtight and statutory. I did not read them. You did not read the contract right now. Lady Eleanor shrieked at the top of her lungs, leaping out of her guest chair, and turning upon her own son-in-law with the vicious, unhinged fury of a cornered predator. You are a senior litigation partner, earning millions of dollars at Kensington and Sterling. And you did not even bother to read the financial covenants before instructing my son to sign away his legal protections in superior court. You absolute, arrogant, incompetent fool. You were too busy stealing client trust money to pay rent for Julian's 24-year-old mistress to perform your actual legal duties. The immediate, poetic irony of Lady Eleanor Montgomery violently turning upon the blue-blood senior partner she had worshipped for a decade was magnificent. Yet I did not permit their domestic implosion to distract me from the final phase of my timeline. Julian had marched onto this 20,000-square-foot trading floor 9 minutes ago, expecting to sit in my executive chair, command 40 analysts, and harvest $12 million to fund his new life. Instead, he had walked into a precision-engineered financial execution. $28 million, Julian choked out, his bloodshot eyes wide with sheer, paralyzing horror as he looked across the table at me. How much debt did I just personally assume right now, Serafina? How much money is due? I stood up from my high-backed executive chair, ing the creases of my tailored emerald silk blazer. With practiced grace I looked Julian Montgomery in the eye, savoring the absolute, uncompromising sovereignty of this moment. Precisely $28,450,000 in defaulted institutional notes. Julian, I said, my voice dropping into a freezing, crystal-clear whisper that carried across the boardroom. And because those private equity notes triggered an immediate acceleration clause upon Thursday's judicial transfer, the $28 million principal plus accrued interest is due and payable in full by Friday afternoon. They are sitting here because $28 million in defaulted overseas liabilities, attached to a Georgia trading firm, triggered mandatory federal enforcement oversight, capital solvency reviews, and wire fraud audits across your personal accounts. I tilted my head slightly, offering him a final devastating smile. You demanded absolute ownership of everything I built over 8 years of 80-hour workweeks. You demanded my kingdom, Chapter 6, the $28M acceleration warrant, and the FBI handcuffs. The sheer, suffocating finality of my declaration hung in the air of the central glass boardroom like a suspended guillotine blade. $28,450,000. Julian repeated in a hollow, ragged whisper, his legs shaking so violently that he slumped backward against the edge of the 40-foot polished mahogany table. How am I supposed to pay back $28 million by tomorrow afternoon, Arthur? You promised me this quantitative trading firm was generating $12 million in net revenue. You promised me I would walk out of this divorce hearing as a multi-millionaire CEO. You ruined my life, Arthur. Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, spraying spit across the litigator's chalk-white, contorted face. You were supposed to be the corporate legal genius. You were supposed to protect our family assets and verify the corporate schedules. But you rushed through the discovery process and forced me to sign Appendix B because you were terrified your wife Beatrix would discover you were paying rent for my 24-year-old mistress. You sacrificed my future to cover up your own infidelity and client trust theft. Arthur Kensington let out a wheezing, desperate gasp as Julian's hands tightened around his collar, his pale eyes bulging with sheer, unadulterated panic. He raised his hands, grasping Julian's wrists in a frantic attempt to break the chokehold. But Julian was blinded by total psychological and financial terror. Get your hands off me right now, Julian. Arthur choked out, shoving Julian violently backward against the mahogany table. I am not going to prison because you signed the corporate transfer without reading the debt schedules. I am filing an immediate emergency injunction in Fulton County Superior Court to nullify Thursday's decree. I will tell the judge that Serafina engaged in intentional fraudulent conveyance and acted in bad faith during discovery. You cannot nullify a voluntary, court-ordered corporate acquisition that was explicitly drafted, demanded and presented by your own legal counsel, Mr. Kensington. Senior Examiner Vance Harrison spoke up, his voice cutting through their chaotic physical altercation with freezing, bureaucratic clarity. Examiner Harrison walked around the mahogany table until he stood over Arthur Kensington, who was leaning against the glass wall, catching his breath. He opened the binder and set the primary page onto the table's surface. Furthermore, Mr. Kensington, your capacity to file civil injunctions in Fulton County Superior Court is permanently suspended as of 9 o'clock this morning, Examiner Harrison stated coldly. Because the $28 million leveraged note structured under Aegis Quantitative Trading LLC involves international financial institutions operating across federal banking channels. The moment, Mr. and during our 72-hour audit of the subsidiary corporate ledgers and wire authorizations, our forensic accounting team cross-referenced your personal billing ledgers against the primary escrow accounts at Kensington and Sterling LLP. Mr. Kensington, Special Agent Brooks announced, her voice level and carrying across the dead-silent boardroom over the pounding thunderstorm outside. You are under federal arrest for 12 counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and misappropriation of fiduciary client funds from an IOLTA client trust account under Title 18 of the United States Code. We have verified monthly wire transfers of $6,500 over 9 consecutive months from your firm's statutory escrow trust to a Buckhead residential management company for personal benefit, alongside the execution of fraudulent commercial promissory notes to launder teacher pension funds from Clarissa Vance. Agent Brooks grabbed Arthur Kensington's right wrist with practiced, uncompromising mechanical force, twisting his arm behind his lower back and snapping the steel cuff shut around his wrist with a metallic click that echoed through the room. No, you cannot arrest me inside a corporate trading floor, Arthur screamed, thrashing wildly against the glass wall as Agent Brooks secured his left wrist into the steel chain. I am a senior litigation partner earning 7 figures at Kensington and Sterling. I demand to speak to the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia right now. This is an unlawful seizure of a corporate officer. You can discuss your legal theories with the federal magistrate at the Richard B. Russell Federal Building during your arraignment at noon. Kensington, Agent Brooks replied. Mr. Montgomery, Agent Brooks continued, stepping toward Julian with the second set of steel restraints. You are taken into federal custody, pursuant to a criminal complaint, alleging conspiracy to commit wire fraud, interstate transmission of fraudulent financial statements, and default on $28 million in federally regulated commercial debt instruments. Put your hands behind your back right now, Mom. Help me right now, Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, weeping hysterically like a terrified child as Agent Brooks clamped the cold steel around his wrists. Tell them who our family is, Mom. Call Uncle Reginald at the country club. Do not let them take me to federal prison. I am the chief executive officer of this company. I sat motionless at the head of the 40-foot mahogany table, lifting my porcelain espresso cup and taking a slow, final sip of my dark coffee, as Agent Brooks escorted Julian Montgomery and Arthur Kensington past my chair toward the private brass elevators. Chapter 7. The Hostile Takeover and the Sprouston Manor Foreclosure. In the immediate chaotic 72 hours following the federal arrests inside the Aegis Quantitative Trading Tower, the institutional, financial, and legal machinery of Atlanta moved with relentless, crushing speed. The immediate public fallout across Atlanta's elite blue blood society was catastrophic and permanent. For Lady Eleanor Montgomery, the structural collapse of her 50-year social monarchy occurred with breathtaking speed across the country club and church circuits she had dominated for 3 decades. Yet the ultimate, fatal blow to the Montgomery dynasty's physical heritage arrived on Thursday morning, via the Civil Enforcement Division of the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. When Julian Montgomery voluntarily executed Appendix B and assumed absolute personal liability for the $28 million high-yield institutional debt structured under Aegis Quantitative Trading LLC. He bound his personal estate to the secondary cross-collateralization covenants embedded inside the private equity notes and acting as the sole private managing director of Aegis Sovereign Holding and Algorithmic Systems, LLC, the Delaware holding company that Hadley purchased and consolidated the senior tranches of those overseas notes 3 months prior. I held the primary unencumbered mortgage liens across every physical property registered under the Montgomery family umbrella. At 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, under a crisp Georgia sky, I drove my personal vehicle through the wrought iron gates of Sprouston Manor, the sprawling 3-acre shaded estate in Buckhead that had served as the ultimate physical symbol of Lady Eleanor's perceived generational wealth for half a century. 2 marked patrol vehicles, belonging to the Fulton County Sheriff's Civil Enforcement Division, were already parked along the stone fountain, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun, while 3 uniformed sheriff's deputies stood on the covered veranda, supervising the eviction process. I walked up the stone terrace steps right where I had placed my 12-pound pan of 4-cheese macaroni on Sunday afternoon. When Eleanor heard the steady, measured cadence of my steel-tipped heels against the stone terrace, she turned her head, her wide, bloodshot eyes locking onto my tailored charcoal power suit. Every drop of her former aristocratic arrogance had been drained from her frame. "You took my home, Serafina," Eleanor whispered, her voice so thin and brittle that it was barely audible over the rumbling engines of the commercial moving trucks. "My grandfather built Sprouston Manor 70 years ago. You foreclosed on the earth beneath our feet." I stopped 5 feet away from her on the flagstones, unbuttoned my charcoal blazer, and looked down at her through my dark designer sunglasses without a flinch of emotional pity or hesitation. "I did not take your home or foreclose on your earth, Eleanor," I said, my voice carrying with crystal clear, freezing precision across the morning terrace. "You and Julian lost Sprouston Manor on the afternoon that you sat inside courtroom 4B and laughed out loud while watching your golden son strip away 8 years of my 80-hour workweeks to fund his mistress. You built your 50-year social dynasty upon a foundation of unearned entitlement, financial illiteracy, and exploiting the labor of the women you deemed socially inferior to your bloodline." I opened my leather folio and retrieved the official, court-stamped master property deed for Sprouston Manor Estate and Gardens, now permanently registered under the corporate ownership of Aegis Sovereign Holding and Algorithmic Systems LLC. "You demanded that I surrender everything I built from the asphalt up to protect your family's church reputation, Eleanor," I stated cleanly, stepping closer to her trembling frame. "You demanded my kingdom." Chapter 8. The fall of the Montgomery dynasty. By Friday noon, 1 week after the initial divorce hearing inside courtroom 4B, the complete absolute structural disintegration of the Montgomery dynasty was finalized across every legal, financial, and civic institution in the state of Georgia. Judge Vance denied bail for both defendants on the spot, ordering Arthur Kensington and Julian Montgomery remanded to the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta pending their federal criminal trials. Simultaneously, Chloe Winslow's survival instincts executed a rapid, ruthless adjustment to her new economic reality. For my birth mother, Clarissa Vance, the structural consequences of her 50-year obsession with high society acceptance and church optics culminated in total, suffocating isolation inside her run-down suburban house, desperate, terrified, and destitute at age 65. Clarissa Vance drove her 10-year-old sedan up to the security gates of the Aegis Quantitative Trading Tower on Friday afternoon, demanding emergency access to my 20-story executive suite to beg for financial salvation and filial forgiveness. I observed her arrival via the high-definition perimeter security monitors inside my 20,000-square-foot trading floor. I picked up the encrypted intercom phone on my executive desk, connecting my voice to the ground-floor security kiosk while watching my mother's face on the high-resolution monitor screen. "This is Serafina Vance," I said into the mouthpiece, my voice carryingly over the lobby speakers where Clarissa stood soaking wet. Security Officer Davis, who is currently causing a physical disturbance at our ground floor turnstiles. Serafina, my baby girl, please listen to me right now. Clarissa screamed into the lobby speakers, her voice cracking with frantic, desperate terror over the rain outside. The IRS just froze my bank accounts and my annuity. They are saying I owe $50,000 in early pension withdrawal penalties because Arthur Kensington's startup note was a fraudulent scheme. Julian and Arthur stole every dollar of my 50-year teacher retirement. I have zero money left to buy food or pay the mortgage on my house. Please let me come upstairs to your office right now. I am your biological mother, Serafina. You cannot abandon your own flesh and blood to starve in the street. I sat back in my high-backed leather chair. I felt zero anger, zero sorrow, and zero emotional hesitation inside my chest. You made your permanent regarding your flesh and blood on Thursday morning, inside courtroom 4B. Mother, I spoke cleanly into the intercom frequency, my voice dropping the ambient temperature of the ground floor lobby by 10 degrees. When you sat in that client chair, dug your fingernails into my bicep, and explicitly commanded me to surrender 8 years of my mathematical engineering and $12 million of my equity to Julian Montgomery, just so you could hold your head high at Sunday church brunch with Lady Eleanor, you severed our biological relationship forever. I was deceived by them, Serafina. Clarissa sobbed hysterically against the metal turnstiles. Eiley believed Julian was a good, righteous Christian man from a noble family. I was trying to keep our family united before God. Please forgive me. You were not deceived, Mother. You were intoxicated by your own desperation for country club status and blue blood acceptance. I countered cleanly. You prioritized Eleanor Montgomery's fake generational wealth over your daughter's sanity and financial survival. I simply took your advice and built my own empire from the ashes. I paused for 2 seconds, looking into the camera monitor at her weeping features. Security Officer Davis, I instructedly over the intercom frequency. The individual standing at the turnstiles has zero corporate credentials, zero familial authorization, and zero business on our trading floor. Escort her off my private property, and if she returns to this lobby, have the Atlanta Police Department place her under arrest for criminal trespass. I pressed the red disconnect button on my executive phone, severing the audio transmission permanently, and turned my executive chair toward my multi-monitor trading terminals, where 40 quantitative analysts were executing our afternoon quantitative balance sheets with flawless, uninterrupted precision. Chapter 9: The Sovereign Ascent. 3 months after the federal indictments and the civil foreclosures, the legal dockets across Fulton County, the city of Atlanta had adjusted to the new economic hierarchy across the financial sector. I walked out onto the shaded stone terrace, where Lady Eleanor Montgomery had once held her Sunday garden tribunals, and presented Julian as the master of my firm. Over the preceding 90 days, the Delaware Master Holding Corporation, completely liberated from Julian Montgomery's parasite credit card drains, country club tabs, and family extortion attempts, had achieved the most profitable operational quarter in its 8-year corporate history. Marcus was a 40-year-old Swiss-American quantitative strategist whose absolute loyalty and mathematical brilliance had helped me engineer the Appendix B debt transfer during my 5 days in Tokyo. The federal bankruptcy trustees executed the final liquidation schedules across the Montgomery estate accounts. At 9 o'clock this morning, Serafina, Marcus announced, his voice carrying professional satisfaction as he opened the first section of the dossier for my inspection. Every dollar of secondary personal liability pledged under Julian Montgomery's debt assumption schedules has been discharged and wiped from our corporate ledgers. Furthermore, the United States District Court just sentenced Arthur Kensington to 14 years at the Federal Correctional Institution in Jessup, without possibility of parole, while Julian Montgomery received an 8-year federal sentence for wire fraud conspiracy. I looked down at the certified federal court judgments, tracing my index finger across the stamped judicial orders, confirming that the 2 men who had attempted to strip away my $12 million kingdom were now serving long sentences in federal prison. And what about the commercial properties and residential leases across Buckhead, Marcus? I asked Lee, closing the federal judgment binder and taking a sip of my espresso. Every commercial parcel, including the Midtown high-rise lease and the 3-acre grounds of Sprouston Manor, where we are currently sitting, has been 100% reconveyed, ed. of secondary mechanics leasings, and recorded under your sole executive ownership. Marcus confirmed, handing me the solid brass ring of master keys. You do not merely control the proprietary trading algorithms and the 40-story corporate tower downtown, Serafina. You are the sole landlord of the Montgomery dynasty's former empire. I stood up from my terrace chair, walking to the edge of the stone balustrade, where the morning breeze rustled the leaves of the 70-year-old oak trees that bordered the estate. Chapter 10. The Master of Algorithmic Destiny and Epilogue. Later that afternoon, as the golden autumn sun began its slow, majestic descent across the western horizon of Buckhead, I walked alone down the stone pathway leading toward the ancient boxwood gardens at the southern edge of the Sprouston Manor estate. In the solitude of my own 60-acre estate, the complete, unvarnished, emotional and philosophical reality of my journey crystallized inside my mind with crystalline, unshakable clarity when Julian Montgomery and Arthur Kensington sat across the mahogany table in courtroom 4B and slid that 60-page settlement binder toward my hands. They were executing a script that had been weaponized against independent, competent women for centuries. Yet the ultimate, defining irony of their conspiracy was that their own blinding, blue-blood arrogance served as the structural mechanism of their destruction. When individuals inside your personal or professional circle attempt to leverage traditional hierarchy, emotional manipulation, or religious guilt to diminish your intellect and strip away the fruits of your labor, you must never engage in hysterical arguments or public scenes of emotional protest. You hold the pen to your own life narrative and your own balance sheets. Never permit individuals who consistently underestimate your intellect, dismiss your 80-hour workweeks, or demand your submission to write the final chapter of your destiny.